Welcome to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. We're applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day so that you can connect the eternal with the everyday and get ready to head out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. So let's get started. This is The Reconnect.
Inspiring you to bring God back into the conversation of the day.
This is The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power we will go. By your spirit we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions. Happy birthday to you. Happy
Spicy birthday song. Paul, that's a little weak.
Oh, you want something a little more peppy? Maybe something
peppy.
like...
A little more peppy. There we go.
There you go. There you go.
Nice.
Happy birthday, Carmen.
That's like the Macarena version of
Yeah,
Happy birthday.
salsa. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, people. Yes, today is my birthday. Go ahead. Get it out of your system. Text line's open, 877-933-2484. Birthday wishes, welcome. We will talk about birthdays and rebirthdays at the top of the second hour. But it's not our growing your faith verse of the day. So we are going to get ourselves into the Word of God here at the opening of the first hour of the Reconnect. And we are going to be utilizing, as we do every single day, the Growing Your Faith verse of the day that you can sign up for at myfaithradio.com. So before we read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, here's what I want to ask you. What image is provoked in your mind when I say, hands up, we've got you surrounded? Hands up, we've got you surrounded. What image is provoked in your mind? Is it a threatening image of a standoff with police and your hands up, or a act of unwilling surrender? Hands up, we've got you surrounded. I would like to plant a different seed, a different image in your mind when you hear the words, hands up, we've got you surrounded. I would like for you to have a reassuring image of a believer in Jesus who is surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses and therefore raising their hands in an act of grateful praise. Do you see how your worldview, the way you see yourself and what's going on around you, totally transforms? Hands up, we've got you surrounded. Like, it could either be a threatening announcement, hands up, we've got you surrounded, or hands up, we've got you surrounded. Great cloud of witnesses. So, where in the Word are you today? We want to let God speak to us through that which He's already spoken, His living and eternal Word. Which brings us to our Growing Your Faith verse of the day, Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially that which easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Hands up, my friend. We've got you surrounded. So who surrounds you in your walk of faith? I mean, the declaration here of the writer of the book of Hebrews is, we are surrounded by a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. So who is that for you? Who surrounds you in your walk of faith? Who's cheering you on from the sidelines and who's running with you the course marked out? Who is your great cloud of witnesses? This is a good journaling exercise. You can start with the people who surround you in your walk of faith right now, your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, the people in your Sunday school class, your small group, your Bible study. You can put the Reconnect with Carmen. You can put Carmen LaBerge on the list. as one of the people who surrounds you in the great cloud of witnesses. And you may be saying to yourself, well, I thought the writer of Hebrews was talking about those who have like already passed on in the faith, like the great cloud of witnesses in heaven. Well, yes. And so who's in that? And that's going to require you to sort of go back through a spiritual lineage. Who are the people who along the way over the course of your life prayed for you, shepherded your heart, taught your Sunday school classes, volunteered at VBS? Who were the great cloud of witnesses along the way, even those you didn't appreciate at the time? So certainly in my great cloud of witnesses is my grandmother, Robina Benefiel. Absolutely no question about it. But my great cloud of witnesses includes a lot of other people, some of whom I don't even know their names, and I certainly don't actively remember them. Those who stood and bore witness to the faith when I was baptized as an infant. Those who taught my confirmation class in the 6th or 7th grade. I don't actively remember who those people were, but they are a part of the great cloud of witnesses. You have a great cloud of witnesses as well. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. So, what does that look like for you? I have a friend in Africa who calls it the carbon-do. What's all that stuff you're carrying around with you that you need to set down? You need to leave it behind. You need to drop it in order that you would be able to run with perseverance the race marked out for you. This is a 2-part strategy for like the daily endurance run of the Christian faith, packing light and looking forward. Real athletes don't run marathons in, carrying luggage. They wear the lightest gear possible. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the things that hold us back as we are running with endurance the race marked out for us. The writer of Hebrews talks about 2 things: entangling sins, the habits, toxic behaviors, compromises that trip us up directly, the things that break our stride and pull us down, and heavy hindrances, the things that might not be inherently sinful, but they're still weighing us down as we are seeking to run this race of faith. It could be toxic worry. It could be overcommitment. It could be social media doom scrolling. It could be old emotional baggage. It could be that you're still carrying around the weight of a non-believing family member. It's one thing for you to be actively praying for them. It's another thing for you to release them into the care of God. So what are the things that are slowing you down in your pursuit of God? And are those weights you need to drop? And then the second instruction here in Hebrews 12, 1-2, recognizing that we're surrounded by a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, we are stripping off every weight that slows us down. Those are those sins and heavy hindrances. And then we are doing what? We are setting our eyes on Jesus. Keeping our eyes on Jesus. You can't run, well, and you really lots of things you can't do staring at your own feet. You've got to, fix your eyes on what's ahead, on the one who is ahead. And you got to let your foot fall where his feet fall, right? So what does it look like to walk by faith and not by sight, in step with the Spirit, step by step with Jesus? What does that look like? What does it look like to run, not in isolation, but in the midst of a great cloud of witnesses? And what does it look like to run with perseverance the race marked out for us by Christ with our eyes fixed on him? What does that look like today? I'm thanking God today that we are in this particular race together. Also celebrating that we're in it with our friend, Dr. Adam Carrington. We are going to talk next about the Bill of Rights. Today is the day in 1789 when Madison submitted the originally proposed 12 rights in the Bill of Rights. We'll talk about that next. You're listening to The Reconnect. On this day in 1789, I will confess, I didn't know what happened on this day in 1789 until Dr. Adam Carrington told me. So he's here. We're going to talk about the Bill of Rights. Adam, welcome back to the Reconnect.
Glad to be here, Carmen, and I understand that happy birthday is in order. And so I wanted to wish you a very happy birthday and say it is an honor to be talking with you on such an auspicious day.
My mom did all the work. So shout out to Ruth Ann, right? Yeah, there you go. So thank you. Thank you for your birthday wishes. So on this day in 1789, what was on the list and why did all 12 not make it?
Yes, so it was during the first Congress, and it was, yes, in June, where the first Congress was putting together the major pieces of legislation that laid the groundwork for our body of law. And one thing that had been not officially, but unofficially agreed to in getting the Constitution ratified, approved by the states, was that there would be a series of additional amendments to it that would lay out a Bill of Rights, a list of the rights that the people have and limitations, therefore, on the government. And so, yes, it was in June that James Madison, who was in the first Congress, having been one of the most important parts of the Constitutional Convention, that he submitted 12 amendments proposed to the U.S. Congress. And yes, 10 of them got passed and have become our current Bill of Rights. And
and I guess as I'm reading it more closely. It was yesterday, June the 8th.
Yeah,
I misspoke.
yes, I was going to bring that up, but that's, we're one day, so they were basking in it at this point. So so anyway, and these have now become, if you ask someone on the street what's in the U.S. Constitution, most likely the first thing they're going to name, if they remember something, is something from the Bill of Rights, not even from the original 7 articles of the Constitution. So it has really become a baseboard for what a lot of the rest of how we understand our rights, how we understand the functioning of government, is very much built off this part of the Constitution. And I think it's because we have such a commitment to the idea that government is limited. Your rights don't come from government. Ultimately, they come from God, and therefore we very much are protective of where the rights that God has given us, and therefore the limitations on government as well.
Yeah, I think that if you were to ask me about, the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, I'd be pretty quick to tell you what's in those. I might not be able to track the whole list. And you're right. If I were to have like a quiz on what's in the Constitution, this is where I would go. This is where my thoughts would go. So I think that is very accurate. Hey, as you're listening right now, we're talking with Dr. Adam Carrington. We're talking about the Bill of Rights. This is America's 250th, and so we're spending time looking at some of our original documents and the thoughts that formed us and shaped us as a people and continue to do so today. There's a lot in here in terms of protections and maybe what are the things that are in the Bill of Rights that you want to highlight today for us?
I think that if you were to walk through the amendments, you would get a coherent view of what human beings are like, and then what even the amendments and therefore Madison and others believe human beings should be, that they're not just a unconnected list or a random list, that the freedom of speech, for example, really says that we are rational beings and that we were meant to talk through, debate, discuss, learn together, and peacefully work out how we should live together, and that speech is the means of doing that. So we need to protect it so that we use our words, not our fists, in making these determinations. The freedom of speech, the capacity to write out those ideas, and the written word, the power of the written word in a written constitution, I think is really important. The freedoms for religion, an establishment clause limitation on the national government, and a free exercise clause. How important religion is, how it gets this privileged place because of because we're talking about eternal and high things that need that special protection. And even later on, all of the protections against searches and seizures without a warrant, or the protection for your legal rights in a court of law that are in the Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh Amendments. These are all saying your life, your liberty, and your property are precious. And for the government to punish you or do anything to you, they really have to show they're doing it for the right reason, because a law's been broken, because something like that's been done. And I think it really shows the preciousness of the person and their rights, and how we have organized a government around recognizing a rational person with rights who is capable of interacting and self-governing with other people. So I think we've sometimes failed to put how those amendments together, I think, have a coherent view of what human beings are like, rather than just being like I said before, a little more of a random list.
For those of you wondering, what are the two proposed things in Madison's original 12 amendments that didn't ultimately make it in, weren't ratified as a part of the Bill of Rights? One of them was about congressional representation, that there would actually be a formula for congressional representation. And as we are in the midst of a bunch of redistricting, we might be thinking to ourselves, well, he was prescient, wasn't he? And then there was also one related to congressional salaries. They couldn't vote to enrich themselves and without an intervening election cycle. But those were the two that didn't make it in. There was a process of ratification that took a couple of years in terms of the Bill of Rights. And so, it's so helpful and informative. It gets us refocused, Adam, on not just the founders, but the process through which America was founded and how deliberative it was, and the voices who were involved. So this is super helpful. Let's take a brief break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Adam to reflect for a few minutes on the fact that the Supreme Court sort of season is drawing to an end. There are a number of significant cases still pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. And so in the final weeks of this current term, we're going to hear their decisions about those things. And so he's going to set us up so we'll know what to expect. That's up next here on The Reconnect. All right, so you've got a pack of cards. You've heard of a pack of wolves. Maybe you have a backpack. You got a lot of packs in your life. But have you ever gotten a Faith Radio welcome pack? I mean, you might be brand new to Faith Radio, or you might just be new-ish. But either way, if you've never gotten a welcome pack, we'd like to welcome you. So text the word welcome to 877-933-2484 or visit myfaithradio.com and request your very own welcome pack today. All right, before we jump into a conversation about what is pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, we have a listener question for Dr. Adam Carrington. Adam, reaching back to our prior conversation about the Bill of Rights, we have a question. How many of them, if any, were derived from the Magna Carta?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think off the top of my head I could say how many, but they are heavily influenced by Magna Carta, but through another prism. So this wasn't the first Bill of Rights. Right after the Glorious Revolution in 1688 in England, the Parliament, as part of working out the relationship with the new monarch, drew up what it called what became known as the English Bill of Rights. Those were heavily based off of the insights of Magna Carta, and then the US Bill of Rights was itself influenced deeply by both of those documents. So, if you want two of the best sources, the English Bill of Rights, and then back to Magna Carta for those kind of protections. We very much are coming out of an English history that itself is very Christian and very much based on some of those ideas. But yes, Magna Carta deserves a lot of credit as a starting point for asking what are the rights of the people. I will say one more thing. One difference with Magna Carta assumed the king back in 1215 in England, the king had all the rights and he was giving them to the people. We start with the opposite assumption. We have the rights and we're reserving them against the government, but still the particular content or criteria, a lot of it has roots back that far, centuries before.
That's good. All right, Bob Castro. Hopefully that is a helpful answer to your question. Now, Dr. Adam Carrington, moving on to our second topic of the day. This is like the Advent season prior to what some call Scotusmas. So the Supreme Court of the United States is in its final weeks of its current term. What are you watching?
Some fairly big cases. They have about 23 left to come out. Now, some of those aren't real big, but there are some significant ones that I think some of the listeners will have heard of. There's Trump v. Barbara, which is the birthright citizenship case. Is someone born on the United States soil just by the fact they were born in U.S. territory? Does that make them a citizen of the United States? What's the reading of the 14th Amendment on that? So that will be a significant case given our immigration debates going on. Little v. Hecox is another case. It's about can states prohibit transsexual athletes from competing in sports other than their biological sex. So that whether that is permitted or not is going to be really big in signaling where the court is going to stand on the broader issues related to that matter. And then I'll give two other quick ones. Trump v. Slaughter is going to be, and we talked a little bit about this a while ago, it's going to be about how much control does a president have over trade commissions and agencies. These are agencies that do a lot of regulation in our economy. Should they be under the control of the executive branch or not? So the relationship of the bureaucracy to our elected branches is going to be a big one. And then the last one I'll say that I think is interesting given recent history. It's called Watson versus Republican National Committee. This has to do with if the Constitution talks about there being an election day, can votes mailed in and arriving after election day be counted as part of that election? What and this is going to have to do with how we conduct our elections, how much leeway states have, given what's happening in California with the vote count voting that I know some people are paying attention to. Does that undermine the election? The perception of the election's legitimacy, whether that's right or not. So the court's going to say not so much what's politically wise, but is there a legal limit on when ballots can be cast? And again, like I said, after the 2020 election, after some of the things happening now, I think it's a legitimate political question more to ask what gives people more or less trust in the process. And so I think their opinion is going to be at least part of that discussion.
So when we talk about the definition of words and what words mean, in this case, election day, what does that mean? How do we interpret that? I think that as Christians, see, these are conversations that we can roam around, with our neighbors without getting into a heated debate about a particular election in a particular city or state or nation. And we could have the day conversation, like we can have this is the day the Lord has made conversation. And, not that I'm going to turn everything or every conversation into a sermon, but I am definitely, Adam, I recognize I don't have a lot of influence or any over what is happening as the Supreme Court justices are deciding this. So I'm going to pray that they would be wise and that they would yield an outcome that is the most helpful for the nation in which we live. But I'm also probably going to be like, okay, when we talk about God's perspective on these things and we talk about election day, I am going to be the person who's going to look at my conversation partner and be like, okay, when we talk about election day, we're talking about you. Like, I want to talk about you as one of the elect. I want to talk about you, not just having this like rolling process with God of whether or not you're going to actually, put your hand down and say, yes, I mean, I'm in, I'm with you. I'm bowing my knee before the Father. I want to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Like, I just think that there are ways for us as Christians to even take what's going on at the Supreme Court, something that we can't readily influence other than through prayer, and be like, okay, how could we have a conversation with a neighbor about the importance of actually making a decision for Jesus and like having this be the day of salvation? So I know I'm spiritualizing it, but there you go. That's my 2 cents.
No, I think that's great. And I would say, too, you said the preciousness of words. If we spend all this time poring over the words written by men, great men, but men nonetheless, and trying to figure out what they meant and how they affect our lives, how much more the very word of God that comes from God. And yes, our American citizenship matters. It's a good thing. It's a precious thing as well, but nothing in comparison to our eternal kingdom and citizenship. And thankfully, we don't get to vote for Jesus. We get to, by faith, be part of the kingdom that he will rule and be King of Kings and Lord of Lords of, regardless of what we would have voted.
It's so good. Adam, we got to leave it right there. Thank you so much for being with us today on the Reconnect. All right, friends, next up, George Barna is going to be here, and we're going to talk about the spiritual regress of Gen Z. Really a fun joy to have our friend George Barna back with us from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. George, welcome back.
Well, always great to be with you, Carmen.
So I was very interested in this report that you guys have issued on the spiritual progress and regress of Gen Z. So this is a part of a larger conversation taking place in the culture about whether or not maybe there is a revival, particularly among our youngest adults in America. So let's begin with the end in mind. If a curious Gen Z person walked into your church as you're listening right now, you got a young adult, somewhere 18 to 23, and they're curious, they're spiritually interested, and they show up at your church, what would they experience? Who would be prepared to disciple them life on life from this point of just curiosity to a place of commitment through a life of transformation? So one of the things that George Barna makes the observation about here in this report is it takes a decade or more to form or certainly transform a worldview. So are our churches really ready for that if, in fact, a revival is taking place? So, George, let's start there. Is a revival taking place among the youngest adults in America?
You know, Carmen, everybody wants a black and white answer to that. And unfortunately, based on the data, I can't give you that because it's kind of a mixed bag. When we looked at all of the different beliefs and behaviors that we've been tracking over the course of time, and we've had the ability to go back and watch this same group when they were teenagers, compare that to what they're displaying today in terms of beliefs and behaviors, there's some good positive signs. But at the same time, there's some counterbalancing negative kind of signs in terms of their spirituality. So it's not an easy thing to answer, but, people say, yeah, but, what's the bottom line? Is it happening or not? And I would say, well, no, not right now. But the good news is certainly what this data shows us is that this is a group of young adults who's still trying to figure life out. They're asking a lot of questions. They're still experimenting with a lot of things. They're looking for answers. And so there is the possibility on the table. We've gone through periods of time over the last couple of decades where we had no window for revival, really. And I say that fully cognizant of the fact the Holy Spirit can bring about revival like that. But just as a sociologist looking at the data, I would say we've had those windows where now it looked pretty bleak. Right now is not one of those windows. The window's open a bit. And so we've got an opportunity, but we can't squander it. We've got to understand this is our time. We've got to be ready. People who are disciples, hey, this is the opening the Lord's given us. And so we've got to be ready. We've got to charge in, and we've got to be committed for the long haul. This isn't a program. This isn't a 6-week course. This isn't a 4-week sermon series. This is a long-term commitment to somebody else's life, somebody who trusts us to walk alongside them, to model it, to ask the right questions, to listen more than we talk. I mean, all of these kinds of things are part of that process that we need to be prepared for and charge into.
Yeah, that is really good. Hey, if you're listening right now, that's George Barna. We are talking about a report issued by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. It's part of the, this larger American Worldview Inventory Survey. And we're happy to send you the link on the text line 877-933-2484 so you can read it for yourself. George, let's talk first about, the glimmers of good news. You discovered one change in favor of biblical beliefs, and then 7 other markers that, there's like movement toward a biblical worldview. So let's start with the one change and then talk about those other evidences of movement toward a biblical worldview.
Sure. I mean, if we look at the belief, what we found is that there was a 10 percentage point increase in the number of these young adults who believe that they are created by God, they're created in his likeness, that sin has affected their life, and so something needs to be done to deal with that sin. They need to be saved. So when they were teenagers, with this particular group, it was at 40%. Now we're at exactly the half mark. 50% of them believe that they were created by God, etc. So, yeah, that's a very good thing.
So, I mean, of course, I'm going to get to that really confuses me in just a moment when we start looking at some of the other things that they claim to believe. But while we're looking at the positive, these other markers are sort of like, hey, they're leaning in the direction of moving toward a biblical worldview. These aren't really like, hey, they're there yet. But what are these other positive markers?
Well, then we can look at some of the behavioral changes. Because, of course, a worldview is comprised of both beliefs and behavior. So there wasn't much positive change in terms of belief. In terms of behavior, what we see is that experimentation desire on their part. So we've got a 17-point increase in the number of them who say that they are deeply committed to practicing their religious faith. Now, the survey asks about their religious faith, not whether it's biblical Christianity or what it might be. But nevertheless, faith is on their radar screen. To a growing number of them, this is important, and they're willing to invest more of themselves in it. We found that they're more likely to rely upon the Bible when deciding right or wrong in the course of their daily activities. The rejoinder there is you got to be careful because only about a quarter of them pick the Bible as their top resource for deciding moral behaviors. But nevertheless, there was growth. That's a positive. We saw more of them who are reading their Bible at least once a week. We found a 5% increase in the number of them who call themselves Christian. And then we saw a softening of their resistance to some biblical behaviors, such as seeking and doing God's will during the course of a week, acknowledging their sins and seeking God's forgiveness, intentionally making time to thank and praise and worship God during the day. I mean, a majority of them are not doing those things, but what we saw is that fewer of them said they will never do those things, and they shifted over into that, well, I'll do them every once in a while category. So it's far from a hard commitment. But again, what we're looking at here is an opening of their mind and heart to the possibility that Christianity is the way to go.
All right, we're talking with George Barna. We're talking about observations that can statistically be made about Gen Z. I think there are a lot of folks who are wondering whether or not We see a few more young people at church. We hear that young people are reading the Bible. Is that true, statistically speaking? When we come back, we're going to have George tell us about, well, some of the negative things that we can look at, negative changes in terms of this particular cohort. But then I'm also going to ask him, what about that whole increased participation in church and or reading the Bible? That's up next here on The Reconnect. When was the last time someone asked you to pray for them? When's the last time you asked someone to pray for you? Here at Faith Radio, we pray with and for you about the concerns in your life, and we share with you the concerns of others. We are a praying people. So we want to invite you to share your prayer request with us. Our team prays continually and intentionally once a week for the requests that we receive. And so share your prayer requests with Faith Radio by texting or calling 877-933-2484. You can share your prayer requests with us, and you can be confident that we are praying for you. So we hear that there are more people, young people in particular, very young adults, 18 to 23. We hear that they're headed back to church, a little bit of the Charlie Kirk effect. Is that true? Dr. George Barna is here with us from the American Worldview Inventory. Is that true, George? Are there more young people in church, and are they reading the Bible?
Yeah, that number has gone up. Now, we do tend to see that things change over time, of course, particularly with behaviors. And we can talk about that. But it's important to understand that because we do what we believe, one of the critical areas to examine are those changes in beliefs. We talked about the fact that there was one positive shift in their spiritual beliefs, but this research also shows that there were a number of negative shifts that took place over the last 6 or 7 years as well.
Okay, the one that has, well, actually, there's two on this list. Well, there's a bunch of them that have me kind of freaked out. But the view of marriage one and the preference of socialism over capitalism, I'm also freaked out that they think Jesus sinned while on the earth. But anyway, start with marriage. What is it that they think about marriage?
Well, they think marriage is basically a personal choice, and that no one choice is any better than any other choice. So, if you want to marry an animal, well, that's your choice. You want to marry somebody of the same sex, that's your choice. Yeah, but what about God's plan for humanity? One man to one woman for life. They don't buy that for the most part. In fact, we saw an 18 percentage point drop in the last 6 years in the number of people in this young adult cohort who say, no, that's not the way it works. It's really all up to the individual.
Okay, so this isn't just a rejection of maybe the creation mandate. This is a rejection of the institution of marriage as defined in Scripture. It's a rejection of how God intends life to be ordered. Like, I don't know how we get to those other sort of layers of cultural institution if we've just utterly abandoned what marriage is and why it exists. So I know that you and I can't plumb the depths of that today, but I'm putting a pin in that, and I'm coming back to that in a conversation with somebody.
Well, and I think you should, because, of course, family is one of God's key institutions, if not the key institution for developing a young person's faith. First of all, for having young people. And, of course, that's not something this research delves into. We've done other recent studies that show that this is a group of young adults who really isn't that interested in marriage, not that interested in having children. They're reframing the whole idea of relationships, rethinking adultery, thinking about sexuality in different ways. So, there's a whole tectonic shift that's taking place here in terms of their philosophy.
All right, George, when we're talking about this particular cohort of young adults, those 18 to 23, you also observed a substantial percentage increase in those who prefer socialism over capitalism.
It was a 17-point difference. It's not a majority of them. That's maybe the good news here. But you got 4 out of 10 of these young adults who say that they would prefer socialism to capitalism. Now, there's two ways of looking at that. One is other research that I've done shows that they don't really understand what socialism is. They bought into kind of the media teaching about socialism, which is it's about kindness, it's about compassion, it's about tolerance, it's about living with your neighbor. All of these kinds of things that, well, Christians believe in that too, but we put it in a different framework, see it in a different biblical context. The other reality is that these are the people who are now starting to take positions of power in our culture. They're the change makers. They're the lawmakers. They're the heads of families who are going to be teaching their children how to think and live. And so the fact that even though they may not understand what it is that they believe, you only reproduce who you are. And therefore, you only teach what you buy into. And so whether you understand it or not isn't the question that they're going to be wrestling with. Their question is going to be, am I getting other people to follow me in this train of thought? And we'll deal with the consequences of that later.
I want to talk about where they're getting their guidance from. We have a 13% or 13 percentage point increase in the number of these young adults who say that horoscopes give helpful guidance. That does not seem very discerning to me.
Well, again, it's an interesting group because the way I read that is, in context, they're searching for things that work. They're not searching for truth because they don't believe there is such a thing as truth, but they are searching for things that work. And so many of them are checking out the Bible right now, but I think we're in an Acts 8 situation. And this harkens back to what we opened the program talking about, which is this is our time. We've got to come alongside them, just as the Ethiopian official in Acts 8 was reading the scriptures, threw up his hands in despair and said, how's anybody supposed to make sense of this? And so, Philip comes alongside him and starts explaining it, and then it works out great. But that's what we have to do. We have to be the Philip to this group of young adults to help them understand the scriptures, because the alternative, as we see in the research, is at the same time that they may be looking at the Bible, they're looking at horoscopes, they're looking at crystals, they're turning to their friends for guidance, and first and foremost, they're just relying on their personal feelings. They'll have an experience, they'll say, well, how did that feel? Okay, that works for me. And again, it's the that works mentality as opposed to that's true mentality.
Also on this list, as you're listening right now, in terms of some observable negative changes, belief that there's no absolute moral truth, but that truth is determined by each individual. We can't know the origin of the universe. We're never going to know how it came into existence, which I just view as a rejection of revelation. But maybe that, George, is, as you're pointing out, just a lack of exposure to revelation, to what God has said about the origins of life. And then this belief that there is no life after death, that we simply cease to exist, that tracks. I mean, we are absolutely seeing a rise in belief in nihilism and expressions of nihilism in this particular cohort, in this generation of Gen Z. So all very helpful information. Where do you want to leave us today in terms of your observations related to the shifts taking place among young adults in the culture?
Well, I think there are two things. One is for us not to get seduced by the excitement of a lot of religious leaders who are saying, oh, they're flocking to churches, they're buying Bibles. Even Barna's got evidence that they're reading Bibles. That's very seductive because we've been praying for that. We've been looking for that. We've been, desiring that for so many years. And so we see a couple bits of information that say, oh, it's happening. And then we sit back and we relax and we thank God. Now, the reality is we know that you do what you believe. And my big fear here is that what we're seeing is that this younger group of adults is testing behaviors, but they don't have the beliefs to back it up. In other words, it's a lifestyle without roots. And what I've found over the course of the 40 plus years I've been doing research is that if the beliefs don't back up the behavior becomes a set of empty routines after a period of time. 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever it takes for that individual. And then they revert back to where they were before. And the worst part of it is for us as disciple makers is when they go through that period, which in their mind is their period when they tested Christianity, and it comes up empty. In the future, when one of us go up alongside of them, we build the relationship and the trust, and we try to get them interested in Christianity. They say, nah, really not interested. I tried that already. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we got to be so careful right now. We've got to be like Philip and go alongside them while they've got that interest showing and start to go deeper with them. We got to do it carefully, but we've got to do it quickly in terms of building that relationship, that bridge, and that opportunity to teach them and instruct them and encourage them and model things for them. But we got to last for the long haul.
It's so helpful. It's so important. We appreciate you being with us today on the Reconnect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carmen.
So, my friend, how would you answer some of the questions in the Worldview survey? What do you believe? And why do you believe it? And how would you converse constructively with others about those beliefs and their beliefs if they believe differently? And how about intersecting with the curious among us? So that reference to Philip and the seeker, the Ethiopian seeker, it comes from Acts chapter 8. I would encourage you to go and read that today. It's a pivotal event in the New Testament. You got this person who is, he's opened the Bible. He's totally curious about the events that have been unfolding in Jerusalem. And he wants to know, who is this Jesus? But the Bible he has, remember, is the Old Testament. And so where would you start in the Old Testament to walk somebody to the reality of who Jesus is, to the cross? Do you know the scriptures well enough to do that? Because that's a test of your behavior, your lifestyle. If George Barna is right that we do what we believe, then our behaviors are actually a huge part of our testimony. What you do, or you do what you believe. So based on what you do, what do you really believe about God's sovereignty or his power, his presence, his assurance, Jesus, the Holy Spirit? You do what you believe. So based on what you do, what is your worldview? What do you really believe? Because that's the testimony that our children and our grandchildren, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, that's the testimony they're really seeing. That's the one they're living with. All right, we've got another hour together up next on the Reconnect. Yes, we're going to talk about birthdays and we're going to talk about rebirthdays. Today is my birthday, so go ahead. You can sing to me on the text line, 877-933-2484. We're also going to have some great conversations with Kathy Cook and our friend Rob Dayton. Thanks for listening to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Let us know how we can help you more fully reconnect the eternal with the everyday. We want to walk with you throughout your journey of discipleship, so let's connect. You can text us at 877-933-2484 or connect with us online at myfaithradio.com and on all our social media. I look forward to connecting with you as we each seek to reconnect the eternal with the everyday.